Hi, Hun. I just wanted to go over a little bit about what the surgery is, what the injury looks like, so that you have an understanding of what's going on. I think overall, obviously, probably have a better idea than I do, but just from what I heard in talking to Dr. Michael. I don't actually know his last name. I didn't think to ask that. But the resident who is the senior resident who is going to be assisting with the operation. So I'll start with some basic information about the spinal cord, and then hopefully that will give us some context for what we're going to be talking about. So essentially, the spinal cord is kind of like a tube, right? There's a tube that's filled with this kind of dense material. This is like the spinal cord itself. The spinal cord is like a bundle of electrical nerves. Like if you think like telephone cables or electrical cables, it's usually like the hard casing around it, and there's lots of little filaments inside, copper wiring, etc. So that's very similar actually to how our spinal cord works, how it transmits information from our brain to our body, different parts of our body, and also from different parts of our body back up to our brain. This is that kind of sensory input. So there's something called the dural canal, the dural sheath, which is like this thick, fibrous covering that protects the very soft and more like malleable material of the spinal cord, right? It's kind of like putty in terms of the texture. So what happens during something like a burst fracture injury is that there are these kind of spinal, like if you imagine my knuckles as each of the vertebrae, right? Each vertebrae is like a little individual puzzle piece that kind of fits on top of another one. So what happens is that the vertebrae kind of sit like this around your spinal cord. There's a hole in the middle of the bone, and in between each of these bony pieces, the vertebrae are usually like a soft, bouncy layer. So this is kind of like padding, if you will, right? So it's kind of like a little bit squishier. And so what this does is that it protects the bones from rubbing against each other, and it also allows, like when our spine stretches, like when we are stretching up really, really high, there's actually a little bit of separation that happens here, and this soft kind of stretchy texture there allows that to kind of happen safely while not impacting the spinal cord underneath it. So during the burst fracture, Anthony's burst fracture was at the T2-3 level, is that the bones there essentially broke. And as they broke from the force of, I'm guessing, him maybe hitting the ground, is that it got pushed out of alignment, right? So I think the doctor had said it got pushed sideways. So if you visualize the vertebrae, let's say this is your T1, T2, T3, at this kind of level here, they kind of got pushed out. As they got pushed out and fragmented and broken, the cord got pulled out with it. So it kind of flexed a little bit in there, and that can have caused some damage or some pinching or what they call compression to those areas. The compression can also happen because as you do that, there's also blood vessels that kind of run along your spinal cord, and those could break, and then there could be bleeding, which can also put pressure on it. With your spinal cord, because it's a soft material, whenever there's like damage here, like compression, it's like if you pinch it with your finger like that, right? So you can see there might be some damage. Now, after the damage is done, there's not very much always that they can do about, repairing this, right? It has to kind of just try and fix those on its own. There is some growth that happens in the spinal cord of the nerves that run through there. It's quite slow, but it does happen. And sometimes what happens is that one nerve that might have been disconnected might, find another pathway. So it might bridge over in a slightly different way. And so what the surgery is doing is that it's a decompression, which means that because of where these things are pushed out of alignment, they're going to try and remove the pieces of bone that are causing this spinal cord to not be in the proper place, so that they can then gently guide the spinal cord back to the safe alignment. And then they're going to insert these two kind of metal rods on either side of the vertebrae, usually kind of along the back end, the posterior end of it, and then they're going to fuse it, which means kind of just take screws and screw it in at the top and bottom usually, to kind of stabilize the area where the injury or the trauma happened. And so this fusing is going to the fusion is going to hopefully happen at the C7 through T6 level. So it's going to go a few vertebrae above and a few vertebrae below where the level of the injury is, and that's just to try and make sure that that area is really, really strong. There's no more movement in it, because it wants to prevent things like additional bleeding or any kind of additional trauma to the area. So that's kind of what the purpose of the surgery is. It's two-part. It's one part to decompress, so remove the parts that are putting pressure on the spinal cord currently, and then also to fuse it to stabilize the spine. So those are some terms that you might hear them say. The other thing to know is just to understand a little bit about the spinal cord, and I have a picture up on my computer. I'm going to try and open that up. Okay, so I'm going to just turn the video around. Hopefully you're able to see that okay. So this is just a picture of the vertebrae. The section that's in red here is your thoracic spine. So this controls nerves that go down to help support like deep breathing in your ribs, and also kind of connects and supports all of the signals that might happen, going from your legs up through your brain. So when there is an accident that happens on this kind of spinal information highway or the spinal cord, even if there's no injury below that level and everything down there is peachy keen, if there's a block here, it still might make it hard for information from the bottom to get up to the brain and from the brain to get down to it. So there's two different neural pathways. There's one that controls your sensation, so that's your ability to tell things like temperature, tell things like if something is pointy, if it's something soft, to be able to know when you're standing, that you're standing on soft ground, on grass, on in shoes, etc. And then there's the motor pathway, which is when you're thinking about doing something like lifting your knee, then it sends signal from your brain all the way down through this area to your leg, and then you move all of that muscle. So some of the impact, because of where the level of injury is, which is right up around here, is that there could be impact to things like deep breathing, as well as anything that's controlled lower than that, which includes, things like bending, things like lifting legs, things like wiggling toes, putting pressure through your leg, clenching your butt, etc. So the vertebrae in your neck, so the white section above here, controls things like your arms, your shoulders, your fingers, your wrist, etc. So these are really important, and it sounds like from what Dr. Michael said, the only injury there is at the C5. There's an a fracture in the articulation at the C5, which is around here, which means that these little flanges, these little legs that kind of are sticking out from the vertebrae, there's a fracture maybe somewhere there. But it doesn't sound like there's any kind of major breaks that they've seen along this area, which is really, really great, because though these are the nerves that are really important for breathing and also moving your kind of shoulders, arms, fingers, etc. This is the area that controls things like your chest, your stomach muscles, your back muscles, and that's in this impacted zone. So when they put in the fusion and they stick these metal, it probably will be about the size of this chopstick. When they stick these metal rods in there, it's going to essentially make your posture really, really straight, and it'll just create this nice, strong a brace from the backside to kind of hold your kind of spine in place while the bones are, they're consistently replacing cells, etc., while they kind of fuse and they grow. He mentioned something about 1 to 2 year post-op there could be removal. I'm not sure too much about that, and that's so far down the line. I don't think it's something we need to kind of necessarily think about now. But the idea is that the metal, usually it's titanium, I think, the titanium rods that they put in there are going to help your spine stabilize, because the natural bone formation at this level has been broken, or it's been disrupted. So that's kind of what the surgery is going to be doing. It's to insert these. That's the fusion part. It's going to be to decompress, which is to remove the broken sections of the T2 and 3. and it'll be kind of screwed in kind of above and beyond. They said from the C, ideally from the C7, which is around here, down to the T6, which is around here. So in this section here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, so about there. But they may need to go a little bit above or a little bit below this level just to get a more stronger support, depending on when they open it up, what it looks like, how healthy the bones look, etc. Okay, so hopefully that explains a little bit about, what the structure is back there, and gives a little bit more understanding around what the surgery is. Okay.